What is up, fellas, and welcome to another episode of Rewriting History with me, the Goob. Today I'm going to be taking a look at, a whole lot of different topics, but the overall idea of this episode, the overall narrative of this episode is that, I've seen, I think largely since the Flint-Dibble debate, alternate history creators getting dragged into this very artificially framed conversation with archaeologists, where the framing is that we have no evidence of lost civilizations, we have no evidence of lost technology, and looking for these things is a fool's errand, and you're kind of a retard if you think that these could possibly exist. And it's such a ridiculous framing of this conversation, because as I'm gonna show you today with many examples, there are the amount of known unknowns, meaning, for example, the Great Pyramid, we know it exists, we know it was built, there's no record of how it was built, we have no idea how it was created, how long it took. They have guesses at these things that, after they make these loose guesses, get turned into immutable facts that just get repeated until they're true. But the reality of our world, the reality of archaeology, is that it's almost entirely unknown. The evidence of lost technology, of lost civilizations, it's literally all around us. So that's what today's episode is going to be about. I've got a lot of notes to draw from. I was trying to get images to go along with this, but I was realizing that I'm just not organized enough to try and cover this many topics, follow along with notes, and keep the right images up on the screen. Is a recipe for disaster for me. So I might download this video and add images in afterwards, but this is going to be largely just an audio stream. I was just talking about the Egyptian pyramid, so I think that's a decent place to start. How many of you are aware that underneath the causeway for Khufu's pyramid, the Great Pyramid, are giant iron ore mines? They go 125 feet deep. They are directly beneath the causeway for Khufu's pyramid, so the long walkway that leads to Khufu's pyramid. The foundation of that causeway is also the roof. There's these massive lentils that are the roof of these iron ore veins that were being tracked and mined beneath the causeway. So this is obviously predates the Great Pyramid, and probably predated enough that it at least was before the idea, the concept for the Great Pyramid was ever even thought of. Because why would you tunnel beneath your main structure, your most magnificent structure on the Giza Plateau? So these predate the Great Pyramid by an unknown amount. There was an iron plate, I believe in 1939 or 1839, something like that, don't quote me on dates, was found inside of the Great Pyramid itself when they blasted it with dynamite. And there's all kinds of explanations as to how this was possibly some modern iron that got lodged in there through the explosion that really just don't make sense. So we have actual evidence of iron in the Great Pyramid. We have evidence of iron mining beneath the Great Pyramid. And then with the recent study on the pre-dynastic vases, I very confidently declared that they were evidence of handmade procedures because I was only looking at the exterior of the vases. But now that high quality scans of the interior of these vases was done, it is very clear that there was an industrialization going on, that there was machining going on. The overall precision of the interior, while not necessarily as impressive as our modern lathing capabilities, the individual circles that the interior is made up of are far too precise for hand tools. It is clear indication of rotational technology. And according to Max Fomichev, and I'm inclined to agree with him, it would require dual rotation. So you have because if you're sticking a cutting edge down into this vase, which could be those pre-dynastic mace heads, the disc-shaped mace heads, and you're only rotating the vase, you're going to wear down one side of that mace head, of that grinding disc, and you're not actually going to end up with this perfect circularity. So you need rotation of the grinding disc in one direction and rotation of the vase in another direction. Both of these to be fixed and have very little play, because we're dealing with, at best 15 microns of deviation here. This is evidence of pretty, end of the Roman era level technology here that we're dealing with in pre-dynastic vases over 6,500 years ago. Egypt had continuous habitation. There's no gap of, like there were humans living here, and then 1,000 years later they were gone for 1,000 years, and then people moved back in. There were people living on the Giza plateau all the way back, 10, 11,000 years ago, all the way through to the present, pretty much completely unbroken. So if you have this high technology of dual rotation, industrialized, lathe technology existing 6,500 years ago, you have iron veins being mined in the Giza plateau before the Great Pyramid, you have iron in the Great Pyramid. It seems very likely to me that technology was developed, and then through this continuous habitation, it was somehow lost. That it would appear that they reached Iron Age, Roman level technology in Egypt, and that's all just dismissed, and you're treated like a quack if you entertain these ideas. But that's just one little snippet, one little idea. I rather like the Inca, the Aztec, all of the South American and Central American civilization and development that's happened in recent years with that, because this is less than 500 years ago. Less than 500 years ago, the Spanish conquered the native South Americans and Central Americans. And that was direct contact with a civilization that was still active, that was still in the middle of building things, of, being their civilization. And in less than 500 years, all of that information was lost. The Inca, the Aztec, they were relegated to myth. Their civilization, the reality of their civilization, El Dorado and all of these stories were relegated to myth. And now with Lidar, we are seeing the unbelievable extent of development that was happening in these areas, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of roads, the millions of structures that are being revealed by Lidar. And again, this is direct contact with modern civilized people from Europe interacting directly with a civilization that's still in existence. And almost all of the knowledge of that civilization, how they built their structures, when they built their structures, what groups actually built their structures, that was all lost completely. And lost to the point that people who spoke of it, who spoke of the great extent of these civilizations, were again regarded as quacks, and still are. This whole narrative of, lost technology and lost civilizations being a myth, it's a myth in and of itself. That is the norm of archaeology. You can look at, the Aztec had trepanning, which is craniectomies, removing a chunk of your skull. And they did it for the same reason that we do it today. They were doing it for blunt force head trauma. You get bashed in the head with a club, your skull fractures, and they have to remove a chunk of your skull to alleviate the pressure and save your life. There are over 1,200 skulls just from the Aztec culture alone between 500 years ago and 1,500 years ago that range from 70% survival rates to over 90% survival rates, depending on the area and the time that they were found in exactly. And our modern day survival rates for that same surgery, for the same reason, is, I believe, 73.5%. So there again is a massive amount of lost technology. We have no idea how they were performing these surgeries. We have no idea how they were achieving such incredible survival rates. There are skulls with over 5 holes in them, or at least 5 holes in them, all of them healed, indicating that people were surviving this surgery 5 separate times on the same individual. The amount of known unknowns is staggering. And yet archaeology tries to present everything as known knowns. We know everything there is to know. And I'm not even dealing with things over 12,000 years old yet. I'll get to those in a minute, the Graham Hancock kind of hypothesis. But even just within the last 500 years, all of that information has been lost from the Aztecs, from the Inca, from massive continent-spanning civilizations. There's elongated skulls as well that, are found in those very civilizations that I'm discussing about, but also found across the world associated with royalty. There's really very little study or explanation done into those. Some of them are obviously from cradle boarding or other forms of elongation that is influenced by people after birth, but there's quite a bit of evidence of a naturally elongated skull group of people that seemed to exist all around the world in the ancient past and was the ruling class, and then was later imitated after those people disappeared for whatever reason for thousands of years by the people that remained by, manually elongating their skulls, along with, all of the nubs, which I'm not going to get into that in this video, but I can refer you back to my previous videos on the nubs, where there's all of these connections all around the world that we have no explanation for. I'm blanking on the guy's name right now, but the naval statues, the hands around the naval statues, he hypothesized that we would find copper in the Tepe civilizations over in Turkey because they found naval statues there. And just very recently, they discovered copper artifacts 11,000 years old from these Tepe civilizations. Pretty great prediction from him there. And another point that really seems to add something to his hypothesis that there was, goes along with Graham's 7 sages hypothesis, that there were these groups of people traveling around the world spreading this technology around the world. He called out that we would find copper there long before copper production was ever supposed to have existed, because they found naval statues there. And then lo and behold, we found copper there. So I'd say he's batting 100 so far. We'll see if that continues to hold up, but it seems like a pretty damn good hypothesis as of now. We have the Yonaguni Monument off of the coast of Japan. It looks almost identical to quarries that you can find in Peru, but it is sunk beneath the ocean, and it would have sunk 12,000 years ago. Obvious evidence of human occupation, human megalithic work happening long before we believed that to be possible. We have the Mount Kailasa, the Kailasa Temple, which was built, I want to say 1,500 years ago. We have, again, hypotheses on who built it, but we have absolutely no record of the construction itself. We have absolutely no idea of the techniques used. We have almost 500,000 tons of rubble that were excavated from that site that are just gone and missing. No idea what happened to them. The entire point I'm making here is that the known unknowns are overwhelming. The standard of archaeology is that we don't know any of these things. Everything is lost. You look at the Antikythera mechanism. That was written about in books from the 1400s and regarded as myth. It couldn't possibly have existed. It's far too advanced, until it was found in 1901 or something like that. It was found a while ago. And then eventually scanned with x-rays, and we realized just how complex it is. I did pull up some images. One of them that I pulled up was a recreation of the Antikythera mechanism, which I appreciated because it's like 2 feet thick. Even in modern day, just trying to recreate what was done in there. They made this device that was like 2 feet thick. The original, I think, is like 11 inches or 8 inches or something like that. It's much more compact. The degree of mastery that was needed to produce this obviously wasn't a one-off invention. Like, this obviously didn't exist in a vacuum. All of the techniques that went in to create such an exquisite device had to be mastered, had to be practiced, had to be put into place into other previous devices. Even if this was a lone workshop, even if there was just one little guy or, little family or something that had figured all of this out, what else did he create? And do you really think it only existed in that one workshop? Or were the Greeks producing all kinds of things like this, right? In the same texts where the Antikythera mechanism is described and regarded as myth, they describe automatons and many other mechanical marvels that are still regarded as myth, even though the Antikythera mechanism has been confirmed now. That's 2,000 years old, right? We have the overwhelming majority of humanity's history is purely guesswork. We don't know jack shit. Troy was regarded as myth from the Homer Chronicles, from the Iliad and the Odyssey. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble speaking, but Troy regarded as myth, and then we found the city. This whole, I'm so sick of how these liars are able to get away with this deception. Because archaeologists, if there's one thing that I've learned about them over the last few years of doing this and interacting with them, is that they are absolutely shameless liars. They do not care about the truth. They love their semantics games. They love just twisting things and warping things, and it's all about scoring points for them. They don't give a flying fuck about reality or the truth or actually uncovering the past of humanity. They are very committed to their narrative. They are very committed to their lies. They do it shamelessly. They do it constantly. And I wish I could say it was just a few bad apples, but it's not. This is the overwhelming function of archaeology itself, is deception. The fact that they've gotten away with framing, the search for lost civilizations and lost technology as some ridiculous fool's errand is so ridiculous. It's infuriating to me that they've gotten away with this. It's infuriating to me that the majority of alternate creators, of people exploring these topics, they still largely go along with this narrative. They present their things often as if they're, like, look, I found this contradiction to your narrative. Their entire narrative is a contradiction. We shouldn't be working to disprove the archaeologists when they have such a long track record of being such deceitful little fucks. It should be fully thrown out and just go with what the evidence shows you. I had Gulag Kulak on here twice now, discussing two different topics. He discussed Dr. Cush's revelations where the Vinca culture has evidence of being far larger and potentially far older than it's suggested of being. We talked about the Tumuli of New Caledonia, out in the middle of the ocean. We have absolutely no idea who built these things. We have absolutely no idea what function they had. We don't know how old they are. We know nothing about them, but we know that there's these major anomalies. I don't know if we went through the math in the episode, but I remember having my mind blown at the size of these iron chunks that are in the ground, cemented in cement, in concrete, before concrete was ever supposed to exist, certainly long before iron was supposed to exist. I think it was many tons worth of iron. I don't remember the math exactly, but these things are massive. We have, there's a ridiculous amount of impossible architecture in India. There's still a significant amount of debate whether lathes existed in India or not, because there's such exquisite circular pillars that are carved to utter perfection. And yet, and I really wish I could find the image for this. I've searched a few times for this and haven't been able to find them. There's a really beautiful example of this temple where you have all of these beautiful cylindrical pillars. And again, they're so perfect. They're so round. It's like, and they're intricate too. It's not just pure roundness. It's, intricate designs while being perfectly round. And you look at it and it's like, undeniably, that's a lathe. But then you look over into another portion of the room and there's an unfinished pillar there where half of it is perfectly round, perfectly intricate, perfectly carved. And then the other half of it is still a square column that is unfinished. So, I'm not even confident whether they were using lathes to do this work in India. We don't have any idea how they were doing it. We know it was done. We don't know by who. We don't know when. We don't know with what technology. And this is the standard, not the exception to the rule. We have the Wari archaeological site. Going back to the Americas, meant to mention this earlier. The Wari archaeological site, or the official name of it is Jinkamoko, was excavated in 2015. The Wari predates the Inca. So the Inca was 500 years ago. The Wari were 1,500 to 500 years ago. And they were believed to be a non-megalithic culture. Now, even before these 2015 excavations, if you go to Jinkamoko, you would find these megalithic remains of aqueducts that, by the time we found them at least, were in complete and total disrepair, to the point that, like, they weren't even broken down aqueducts anymore. The rocks had been completely removed from whatever structure they were initially a part of, and they were just kind of loose stones, but they have these holes in the middle of them. Wari aqueducts. Let's see if I can pull up an image of these, because they're pretty interesting. But, aside from these anomalous stones, let me add it to the screen real quick. Aside from these anomalous stones that had been found on the surface, the Wari were still believed to be a non-megalithic culture until the 2015 excavations exposed that it was a massively megalithic culture. They had, and good luck finding images of this online. You'll find a very small handful if you look for Wari archaeological site Jinkamoko, but they're buried, below the first page. And if you speak Spanish, you'll have an easier time finding them, because almost nothing was ever reported in English on these things. But there's these massive megalithic structures, huge stones, and perfectly fitted, no mortar, again, joints that you can't fit a razor blade in between. And the indication would seem to be that this also actually predates the Wari. So who was building this? And is it entirely possible that the narratives of Graham Hancock and I'm forgetting the other old white-haired guy who really likes Peru and presenting on it, whatever his name is, that these structures like Pumapunku are actually 12,000 years old or older, or at the very least far older than the Inca? I mean, the Inca were supposed to be the first megalithic civilization besides the Olmecs. And yet here we have the Wari archaeological site with these massive, perfectly fitted megalithic structures. Where did they come from? What civilization did those come from? You have the Longyu caves in China. Again, these giant megalithic caves. No record of them being created. Again, continual human habitation in the area, in that part of China, for thousands of years. Who built these? When? With what technology? You have weird things like the rivers of mercury underneath Teotihuacan that's in Mexico, I believe, right? And you have the rivers of mercury underneath the Chinese pyramids, underneath the Chinese tombs. Why and for what purpose? Was it truly just decoration? Was there an associated lost technology going along with this? The Lycurgus cup, which one of my best episodes ever, having that glass blower on to talk about the Lycurgus cup, it's regarded as an accident. Like I was talking about the Antikythera mechanism regarded as myth. So then when we find these things, the other technologies written about in the same text still regarded as myth. You have the Lycurgus cup, that one of the most immaculate glassware I've ever seen in my life. Color changing, requiring very precise understanding of how gold and silver and glass all interact with each other. And it's treated as an accident. The mainstream explanation for the Lycurgus cup is that this absolute master craftsman made it on accident. Because, again, the level of technology required to do it intentionally, just unfeasible to the mainstream archaeologists. This was Roman technology. So I've addressed now from, thousands of years ago, going back, Troy, like 3,000 years, I want to say, off the top of my head. I'm terrible with dates, so don't crucify me if I'm getting things wrong, but all the way up through 500 years ago with direct contact from, civilized people. And all of the information is lost. All of the knowledge is lost. All of the technology is lost. It's all unknown. Also with the Native American theme, you have Nezahualcóyotl from shortly after the Spanish arrived. He's one of the earliest active leaders of the Aztec that's recorded in some of their codices. And his first depictions 100 years after his death are him having white skin and red hair. In the same codices, they have, the traditional Aztec presenting people. So why are Aztecs, who were creating these codices, depicting their leaders as people with red hair and white skin? This would have been before, the Spanish arrived. Were there white people here? Similarly, you have the Michigan relics, which I've covered that in the past, and just the shenanigans going on with the dismissal of them. Scott Walter recently was able to get into the museum that holds them and inspect them in person. So I'm hoping we'll be able to learn more about those. I hope he does a really great presentation on them. But you have the Michigan relics. You have so many other artifacts like the Los Lunas, New Mexico Decalogue stone, again regarded as a fake because it was discovered by the same person who discovered pre-Clovis, or I guess he discovered Clovis points and dated them. No, pre-Clovis. He discovered pre-Clovis evidence. And this was in the early days still, when pre-Clovis was fully denied. And so he got branded as a fraudster for finding legitimate pre-Clovis evidence. And now that taints all of the rest of his work, even though any rational person has since validated that he didn't fake any of his evidence. For him being the archaeologist that inspected the Los Lunas, New Mexico stone, that's also a fake because it's coming from a fraud, right? It's the flimsiness of their excuses. When you actually look into the archaeological record, you start to see that it has more holes than Swiss cheese. The norm is unknown. Despite the narrative being presented is that we know everything, and asking questions about these things are foolish. You also have the Hanukkah mound, I want to say in Ohio. That's clearly a menorah and a oil lamp that was from the roughly 2,000 years old. More evidence of cross-ocean travel long before Columbus. You have the Barabar caves in India along with the Asoka pillars. These pillars are undeniably before the rest of these megalithic structures were getting created in India. And by the way, I believe that the Kailasa temple is actually 1,500 years old. I don't think it's super ancient because it depicts the Mahabharata. The temple itself is the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata has real world events in it that, you can't really depict before they happen, right? So you have this explosion of megalithic architecture happening in India, but then you also have these very curious examples that kind of stand alone, like the Barabar caves, like the Asoka pillars, which are these incredibly exquisite megalithic constructions that do predate all of these other megalithic constructions. We don't actually know anything about them. Yes, they have some inscriptions on them. I don't love the argument of inscriptions being lower quality means they were obviously added later. But in the case of the Barabar caves and the Asoka pillars, I think they were almost absolutely added later. They were scribbled upon by a king who knows how much after the fact. The amount of unknowns is overwhelming. And again, all of this is focusing on the last 12,000 years, including Göbekli Tepe, which now has copper production, right? Megalithic structures and copper production dating back 12,000 years, thousands of years before ever believed any of those things were possible. But then you look at the evidence that goes way before that, way over 12,000 years old. You have the Bismoon cave in Morocco, where there's evidence of micro drilling 130,000 years before present. So 130,000 years ago, they were drilling sub-centimeter holes in beads, in shells to create beads. Similarly, in the School Cave of Israel, there's similar beads that are over 100,000 years old. You have the Denisovan bracelet that's made out of green chlorite that also has evidence of fairly precise drilling in it that dates back 40,000 years. And, when I talked about that previously, I made the argument of how, like, we have millions of people living in caves today still. The people living in caves today are not exactly the peak of our civilization, right? They're still living largely as cavemen. The peaks of our civilization occur around the coast. Over 90% of the human population lives along a coastline today still, and all of our greatest technological cities are all along coastlines as well. So these are the kinds of things we're finding in caves 40,000 years ago. What might be buried under the coastlines because ocean levels rose significantly, again, this is like, if we're drawing parallels to today, is it a reasonable assumption to assume that you'd find far greater technology buried along the coastlines where the majority of people, the majority of civilization, and the majority of civilization's advancements have occurred along the coasts? You also have I had some other super ancient examples. You have the dolmens. This isn't a super ancient, or possibly it could be, because you have the dolmens in the Ural Mountains along with Gornaya Shoria and the giant rubble piles in the Ural Mountains, the massive amounts of micro tungsten spirals in the Ural Mountains. There's no civilization even associated with these structures. Some of these dolmens are some of the largest, most megalithic dolmens in the world. There's thousands of these dolmens. They haven't been explored because they are in just such a harsh environment, very similarly to how the rainforests of South America have largely been unexplored. These are massive forests that are fully removed from civilization, modern civilization today. And so very little archaeological work has been done there, but we have no idea when these things were built, who built them. There's no civilization associated with these structures. There's a lot of debate over whether, obviously the dolmens are man-made. Is Gornaya Shoria man-made, I mean, there's stairs built. Even if it is a natural structure, there's stairs built into these structures. There's obvious evidence of man-made, manipulation happening to this potentially natural structure. The giant rubble piles, which I've shown before, they certainly don't look natural. They're these massive, massive piles of stone rubble in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of frozen Russia. We don't know anything about these things. I had a few more. Let me check my other notes here, because I had a few more of the super ancient examples. I thought I had a few more super ancient examples, at least. The cart ruts, right? So there's cart ruts all over the world. I say cart ruts. We have, again, no idea what these are, but they're ruts that are carved into the bedrock. They don't actually appear to be cart ruts because they crisscross. They go, the width changes sometimes. They'll go from 2 lanes to 1 lane. But we have, they're seemingly deliberate. We have no natural explanation for them. We have no man-made explanation for them. They go for thousands of miles sometimes. The cart ruts in Malta go straight off the edge of cliffs. They go straight into the ocean. There's all of these anomalies that we just don't have explanations for. And again, I'm not going to go deep into the arguments about the nubs and these other strange features that are found across megalithic sites all around the world. But, feel free to check out my previous videos on them. I think they're pretty good. And we have no explanation for these things. The explanation of convergence doesn't make sense for a lot of this stuff. Building a pyramid, okay, that makes sense. It's the most natural, building structure, the most basic building structure. You start with a wide base and you build up and you get more narrow. But things like the nubs, they have no explanation for convergence. We have the amount of underground megalithic work like Darren Kuyu, entire underground cities that have been built. Again, we don't know when, we don't know who, we don't know why, we don't know how. Huayatlaco is the other one that I wanted to mention. So in Mexico, we have Huayatlaco, which has pretty compelling evidence for human occupation in the Americas going back 250,000 years. Long before humanity was ever supposed to have set foot on these lands. And there's a pretty good breakdown. I think it might be by Raul, by Pillars of the Past, of the whole Huayatlaco scandal, because it is a hell of a scandal. The archaeologists that were working there, they were raided, they were arrested, they were slandered, they had all kinds of crazy shit lobbed at them, simply for following the evidence. They found, remarkable evidence of very, very ancient human occupation. Nothing too crazy. We're talking stone tools and stuff, but these stone tools were dated using many different dating methods, all of them coming back well before human occupation was ever supposed to have started in the Americas. And this is a story that doesn't even really get dismissed by the mainstream anymore. They were viciously attacked, both literally and figuratively, when this was going on. And then it just kind of gets covered up, gets totally ignored. It doesn't even get discussed anymore. And this is again the norm. This is how these things operate. I told the story about a guy in Egypt who discovered a translucent alabaster sarcophagus with a unique sliding and locking lid, because instead of opening from the top, it opened from one of the ends. So the end slid down into place, locked into place, and then you would have to somehow unlock these things because there were components that would hold that door in place so it wouldn't be easily opened again. But it slid up and down, rather than the top coming off, it slid up and down from the edge. He ended up killing himself after discovering this sarcophagus, extracting this sarcophagus, and then it sank on a boat on the Nile. So before it was actually presented, like to the public, he lost the evidence for it. Later, after his death, similar sarcophagi were found, validating him, but he was ridiculed so harshly by mainstreamers that he ended up killing himself. I believe he threw himself into the Nile River along with the lost sarcophagus. And there's multiple examples of things like that happening. I mean, these people, the archaeologists, you should have a visceral disgust and contempt for these people. They have, again, zero interest in the truth. They have zero interest in actually discovering humanity's past. They have extreme interest in maintaining their narrative, in attacking anyone who goes against it, who dares to question it, and ridiculing people and making them feel stupid for asking obvious questions. I'm infuriated at the fact that they've managed to control the conversation so well and are still controlling this conversation so well. There's still people debating, is it reasonable to ask questions about lost civilizations? Like, of course it is. Even if we're not talking about 12,000 years ago, we have so many lost civilizations just from known history. Again, Troy, myth, right? I'm going to read through chat real quick. Doesn't seem like you guys are saying too much. I appreciate it, obese Asian. I appreciate it, obese Asian man. Nan Madal, there are over 100 islands that were artificially created out of basalt, kind of like Venice, right? But again, we don't know who built these. It's a completely lost civilization. We have no idea who built these. We have no idea for what purpose they were built. We have no idea how. There's not even local basalt there. 100 plus islands created over in Micronesia. Pumapunku. Again, lots of anomalies. No idea who created it. We have some myths. We have some suggestions, but we don't know. Göbekli Tepe, Derinkuyu, Sacsayhuaman, the Longyou Caves, Baalbek, again, a highly debated thing. And I initially dismissed it. I go, there's no reason the Romans couldn't construct this. But Baalbek, and I might show this off in a later episode, or if I do go back and edit this episode, I'll include some of the images here. Everyone's familiar with the really big stones at Baalbek, but did you know that there's also like ridiculously intricate carvings and a ridiculous amount of intricate carvings going on at Baalbek as well? I was unaware of that until fairly recently. It's a very interesting place, and I don't know exactly how they lifted those 1,000-ton blocks. Rapa Nui in the Moai and Rongo Rongo, which has strong correlations to the Indus Valley script. A lot of the symbols in Easter Island are repeated from the Indus Valley. Before the Indus Valley, we have evidence of micro drilling beads as well. There's holes, again, well sub-centimeter holes. And some of these drilled through like 5-inch long pieces of stone. It's not just these tiny beads with tiny holes, but there's these long tubular beads, tons of them. Pre-Indus civilization, micro drilling going on. We have just endless examples. The entire point being that this is what archaeology is it's completely full of unknown unknowns and known unknowns. What it's not full of is known knowns. We have very little known knowns within archaeology, and yet that is the entire narrative presented to us, is that it's all known knowns, and even asking questions about these things is foolish. It should be truly infuriating to you. It should be a visceral reaction to these liars and these charlatans that call themselves archaeologists. I don't think people have enough anger at the bullshit that has been pulled by these people and is still being pulled by these people. The whole conversation is the wrong conversation that we're having. The framing is all off. The framing is all wrong. The narrative needs to be discarded. These people need to stop being treated with respect. And one of the most frustrating things I see, and I see this a ton in politics, is like years after COVID, they'll come out and they go, oh yeah, the vaccines actually were killing people. And you have all these people come out of the woodworks and go, see, I knew it all along. I knew that was happening. And it's like, okay, then why did you wait for the confirmation from the liars? The liars have to let you know that they're lying years later before you actually come out and go, oh, I knew it all along. Like, stop listening to these people in the first place. And that was an analogy, but that's what's done in archaeology. The same thing, like El Dorado, all of the myths about these South American, Central American civilizations, they were regarded as myth, even though many people knew that they weren't myth, they were real. These were grand civilizations, but the archaeologists tell you they're not until, the Lidar scans come out. Oh, I guess we were wrong. And then you have these people coming out of the woodworks. I knew it all along. Stop listening to them in the first place. You know they're liars. You know they're dishonest. You know they're not pursuing the truth. Stop even listening to them in the first place. And then stop waiting for them to admit to their lies before you call them out on their lies. Like, that's not, you're not really accomplishing anything there when you go, oh, now that they've finally admitted it, I knew it all along. Just say the truth from the get-go. Stop being afraid of being judged by people who have made a career out of being dishonest, right? When Flint Dibble says I'm a moron and says I'm, wrong about my hypotheses, like, I don't care what he has to say. I don't care what any of these people have to say, because time and time and time again, not only in the broader scheme of things, but in direct interactions that I've had with these people, they have shown themselves to just be unabashed, unapologetic liars, manipulators of the truth. And so I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with how people still cling to these liars. Even the people who acknowledge them as liars, they still are like working from the foundation of the narrative that is presented by these liars. And it makes no sense. We need to divest from archaeology. We need to divest from the mainstream, and we need to explore these things in an honest way, which can't be done while clinging to these narratives and these archaeologists that are just full of shit. So hopefully, I don't think I presented anything revolutionary here. I didn't really present any new information. This was largely just a recap of information, except with the exception of the reveal of copper tools in the Tepe civilization over in Turkey. That's a pretty major revelation. And my commentary on the vases a little bit, which seems to indicate that there was industrialized, lathe technology existing in Egypt before the pyramids were constructed 6,500 years ago. And then through continuous habitation, that technology was fully lost, because there does seem to be, despite there being evidence of iron ore mining before the Great Pyramids construction, despite there being evidence of lathes before the Great Pyramids, there is a long span of history where in Egypt, those things do seem to be void. They don't seem to be present. And then they come about again thousands of years later. But with continuous human occupation, those things were created, they were lost, And then thousands of years later, they were created again. And my suggestion is that this is what's happening constantly throughout the entire world. This idea of linear progression is nonsense. This idea of, until we have the actual Antikythera mechanism in our hands, and until we have the automatons that are described in the same passages as the Antikythera mechanism, that it's all myth. This is all nonsense. We have to really reevaluate how we're looking at history, and we can't be using the mainstream narrative as our foundation for doing so. So hopefully, maybe this leaves you thinking about things a little bit differently, and hopefully you enjoyed it. I think because no one wants to comment on me creating a separate political channel, I think I probably will continue talking about politics on this channel. I'll most likely keep live streams for the archaeology and keep videos largely for the politics, and I'll just brand it Politigoob. And that'll, this is rewriting history. My politics videos will be Politigoob, and it'll all be on the same channel. Unless you guys want to weigh in and suggest something else, I think that's probably what I'll end up doing. I'm going to try and put out a political video here shortly. I've been working on it, so hopefully I'll get that out soon, and hopefully I'll catch you next week with another episode of Rewriting History with me, the Goop. Peace out, fellas. Peace out, fellas.